It's one of those things. But Sitchin, it's clear as day, he's trying to piggyback on the Bible. And he's trying to fit this whole thing into history. You got to understand that it's him. Now, he sold millions of books, and that's why he's stuck, because he was able to tell a story, and that's what they're good at. Jupiter becomes a demiurge, or the demiurge, however you want to pronounce it. Jupiter is the demiurge. What is the demiurge? And it says here, a being responsible for the creation of the universe. In Platonic philosophy, the maker or creator of the world. That's important. In Gnosticism and other theological systems, a heavenly being subordinate to the supreme being that is considered to be the controller of the material world and antagonistic to all that is purely spiritual. So we just read that Jupiter is the demiurge, right? And how do you become a demiurge? To be a demiurge, you have to be a creator god. You have to have created the world. So Jupiter created this planet. And it says here in Scientific American, a new study, however, suggests that without Jupiter, Earth itself might not exist either. Where this and the other rocky planets now orbit, there may have first been a previous generation of worlds destined to be bigger, gas-shrouded, utterly uninhabitable orbs. But Jupiter came swinging in, clearing the way for small worlds like Earth by destroying those older planets. The study, co-authored by California Institute of Technology, planetary scientists, whatever. Now it says here, it is understood, and this is from David Topper, it is understood that Velikovsky believed the Earth and Saturn to have once moved in close proximity, with the Earth perhaps revolving as a Saturnian moon. The Saturn myth proposes that Saturn, fixed at the celestial pole, loomed massively overhead a central sun venerated by all mankind. Evidence is presented there for a Saturnian polar configuration as the source of early civilization's dominant symbols. Velikovsky believed and argued that Jupiter and Saturn were most likely part of the binary system of stars because of the outstanding position of Saturn in the ancient world. As Velikovsky claimed, Saturn was probably closer to Earth and more of Jupiter at the time. So now understand, saying here, did the Great Flood actually occur? An already open question for today's disputes. According to Velikovsky's research, he did not just happen. This did not just happen. But also, through the fall of Saturn and his giant space neighbor Jupiter, in the above-mentioned book, Worlds in Collision, Velikovsky argued that Saturn and Jupiter came very close to each other, being on orbital paths that differed from the current ones. And then it was supposed that two bodies, such as Jupiter and Saturn, came close together, causing severe perturbations and powerful tidal effects in the atmosphere. Being a system of binary double stars, they could interact to such an extent that they would lead to a stellar explosion. Velikovsky suggested that an event placed the planets in the place that we see today and launched a chain of events that resulted in a flood on the Earth. People that remembered early tragedies enacted in the sky by the heavenly bodies asserted that Jupiter drove Saturn away from its place in the sky before Jupiter Zeus became the chief god. Saturn, Kronos, occupied the celestial throne. In all ancient religions, the dominion passes from Saturn to Jupiter. So now, you just go back, let's look at Genesis. Genesis, God created the earth. So who created the earth? What created the earth? God. What was it telling you? Jupiter. Just read to you. Jupiter. Because of Jupiter, the earth was created. So in the beginning, God created the earth. Jupiter. So then what happened? You had something happen on the planet and God got pissed and caused the flood. But what caused the flood? Jupiter. Now you gotta bounce back and forth between stories. In the mix of this, what's supposed to have taken place? Saturn, which is Satan, fell. There was a war in heaven. Just told you, Jupiter and Saturn. So the fall of Saturn is the fall of Satan, caused by God. God is who? Jupiter. Jupiter caused Saturn to fall as being a star. It's telling you what Saturn is Satan. And then again, Jupiter causes this flood. Who causes the flood in the Bible? God. It's Jupiter it's talking about. And it says here, in alchemy, Saturn symbolizes lead, which is the base form of gold. This is to symbolize the fall of Saturn, who was once a golden sun, but has been reduced to base materials. Understand what it's saying? Base materials. This is the tale of two suns. As Saturn's energy is siphoned away by Jupiter, it is shot out like bolts of plasmic lightning. Zeus, Jupiter, lightning bolts. Some say these hit a planet, which then becomes the sun as it explodes into life. Others that these sparks of divine essence from the new sun on their own. So now understand, Jupiter is the son of Saturn. As he said, he was taken down by his sons. Jupiter is the son of Saturn. But, you have now, it's conundrum. Where does this come from? And it's basically giving you, what it's talk about in Gnosticism, where you have what, Jupiter being the son of Saturn and Jupiter being God, the creator of this world. Where do we see this? We see this with the demiurge and Sophia. Sophia creates the demiurge. You understand? So we have Saturn creating Jupiter, which created this world, son of Saturn. And then we have with Sophia creating the demiurge, which the demiurge in Gnosticism created this world, trapped us in flesh. What happened with Saturn? They trapped him in the cube, which is materialism. So this is all symbolism. It's going to make a lot of sense if it don't already. We have the same thing with Mary. And as you can see with this book here, that's what they're trying to allude to. But you also have with Saturn, the Satan aspect, which for, with Sophia, that would be the demiurge. And we would look at the demiurge as being, evil. And then we go back and look at, well, wait a minute. How do you tie this together with Jupiter? If Jupiter created the earth, which we're here because of that, then that means God is evil. So then you got to understand and look back. Well, wait a minute. So we had a golden age where everything was going great. And that was under Saturn. So how can Saturn be Satan and the evil one? So then you start to understand Satanism and why the occult is, this way. And why all of the Saturn worship, which is deeper than this. That's old knowledge. The whole Jupiter, Saturn, the Genesis part that you just saw, that I talked about. That's esoteric knowledge. That's masonry. That's stuff they know about. So that's stuff he knew about, that he knew the rest of the world, for the most part had no clue what they're talking about with the fall being of Saturn and, by the hands of Jupiter or what have you, this whole clashing of the planets that showed you Velikovsky is talking about. And we can see how Sitchin piggybacks off of that. And it says here, according to Sitchin, Nibiru, whose name was replaced with Marduk in original legends by the Babylonian ruler of the same name in an attempt to co-opt the creation of himself, collided catastrophically with Tiamat, a goddess in the Babylonian creation myth, the Anunnaki, which he considers to be another planet once located between Mars and Jupiter. This collision supposedly formed the planet Earth, the asteroid belt, and the comets. Sitchin states that when struck by one of the planet Nibiru's moons, Tiamat split in two. And then on the second pass, Nibiru itself struck the broken fragments, and one half of Tiamat became the asteroid belt. Think about that. The second half, struck again by one of Nibiru's moons, was pushed into a new orbit and became today's planet Earth. Sitchin also speculated that Pluto, which he identifies as both Gaga and Ismod, was originally a satellite of Saturn, but Nibiru's gravity perturbed it, sending it to the outer solar system and giving the body its peculiar orbital path, intersecting the orbit of Neptune. So people didn't know that stuff. People had no clue back then about this information. A lot of this stuff just started coming out once we got, the internet. But Sitchin knew because he's a Mason. So he understood, the esoteric, genesis of the Bible. And as you can see, Stitch's story clearly coincides with what we just showed you with Velikovsky and its collision between Jupiter and Saturn. So, clear as day, you know what's going on. You can get into the story if you want to. You can read about Enki and Enlil. It's the same. Just like we have Egyptian mythology, just like we have Greek mythology and Roman mythology, the Sumerians had mythology. Now you got to think about who gave us these mythological stories, because you're not going to hear it the way that it was meant to be heard. You're going to get a watered down, esoteric part given to us by the Greeks. Same thing with Egyptians, same thing with Greeks, same thing with Roman and everybody else. We don't know, because we can't go back there and, read the language. But we got to understand, again, universal law, that they have to give us some truth. But Sitchin is a Mason. And he's embarked on, well, when he put this out, he's passed now, I believe 2010. But he was embarking upon what they call the great work. And this is just something that has to be done to reach 33rd degree of Freemasonry. And the great work is basically exactly what he did. It's doing something, whatever that great work, you agree upon or you decide to undertake or what have you. This was his great work. And it was putting this out. And he succeeded in doing what he wanted to do. And you don't get, this is one of the things you got to think about. He's a Jewish guy. Just think about you trying to self-educate yourself in the toughest, dead, hard language ever to learn on your own, but to be able to learn it, supposedly learn it, and to have the audacity to write books on it and have your book accepted and have millions of people buy it and have press and all these people knowing who you are. How is it possible for you to get this type of attention off of a story that nobody can corroborate, that sounds crazy, that goes against the archaeology, goes against the science, go against astrology? But this dude is able to put it out there. And it's because the people who are running these fields, who is up there and have the power, are in the same group as him. Masons. It's the same people. So he gets the criticism because that's what they do. You see it on the news all the time. It's like, okay, well, these major companies, they tell on themselves, because at the end of the day, the people who matter at the top are not going to jail. They own the jails. So they can tell on the CEO or whoever they got to run the company if they did something, or they put the fall on them, send them off. Meanwhile, the true owners, nothing ever happens to these people. But you see it on the news all the time, them throwing each other under the bus, because they have to keep things up, keep the appearances up, to make it look like they can be held accountable for stuff when they're not. So these people tap dance around the truth. They could put out whatever. And people just eat it and believe Sitchin and believe this work and wanted more books. And he put them out. And Stitchin's whole thing was, selling books, selling tours to Africa, which he got crazy money off doing, to tell a story that never happened. Now, I don't understand why people desperately want to believe this story, especially how absurd it is. It's stupid. The real Sumerians, like I said, one of the main things they talk about was extraterrestrial. We know about the fish-like creatures, was the Ones, and the Sumerians talk about these beings coming down and giving knowledge to them. And it's funny because you have the same type of story from the Dogon, saying the same type of fish-type headed creatures came down and gave them information, and that's where they came from. So you got to look at both civilizations. It's like, whoa, they have an identical story now. And that's good. So you have this, you got this information, and it's distorted. They don't want to get into that deeply because we're going to get into too much of the truth. So Stitchin, okay, it's almost a huge cover up. Well, it is a huge cover up. You come in, you give us a good story that's going to detract from the truth. So you want to believe that, okay, Enki and Enlil, this whole thing was about basically a rebellion of the people who was working on the planet, and they was tired of being worked so hard, and they wanted them to basically create something that was going to help them out, which they took the Homo sapiens and genetically modified them to mine gold. Now, if you have the capability of genetically modifying Homo sapiens and to just be able to travel planets. You got the capability to get gold with no problem. To build robots, to, this is advanced civilization we're talking about here. You don't make something as complex as us to mine gold. It's overkill. It's stupid.